Welcome back to Call Me By Your Game, the podcast where I, your host Connor McCabe, bring on a guest to hear from them about a meaningful or memorable video game from a particular moment in their life. On the show, you'll know we talk to our guests as much about what made playing that game special and what still sticks out to them to this day, as we will get into the context of that moment when they had this connection with it in the first place, or possibly revisit. We'll have to see what the situation is on the episode today. A little bit of housekeeping up top is that anything that myself or our guest today plugs, you can find a link in the show notes wherever you're listening. So whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or even watching on YouTube, if you scroll down and you're interested in following one of the links or plugs that I guarantee are going to be enticing today, then you can just scroll down, click a link, and you'll be able to find us there. That includes all the social media we're going to be plugging, our Patreon network, Super NPC Radio, which I'll plug at the end of the podcast as well. All sorts of stuff. Now, why can't I think of the things I plug? I do 100 of them every episode. It should be easy. But anyway, if you want to follow us, support us, find other ways that you can, find out more about the show and myself, there's links in the show notes. But that'll do it for the housekeeping. And I'll finally introduce our guests for today's episode. So please welcome, doer of all things, Herb.
Hello, hello.
Welcome,
nice
Herb. Now, peek inside the curtain, inside the curtain for the listeners. Is that what it is? Anyway, behind the curtain, that's what it is. Doer of all things. What do we think? I told you I just came up with something on the fly. Does it seem like a great title for you?
Yeah, that's all right. That works. I think at this point, GaymerHerb is pretty ubiquitous, but for many years it was Game Master Herb, and Herb always works. I feel like no one I know knows another Herb. I'm like the only Herb in their phone, so yeah. There you go. You know,
I was moments before you said that, I was thinking, I was like, I don't think I know another Herb.
Yeah,
and I'm sure I'll meet another one, later today or something because we're speaking about it. But Herb, welcome on the show. I'm so excited to have you on today. To give the listener a better idea of who you are and what you're up to, what do you want to share with us? Where can we find you on the internet?
Okay, so I am GaymerHerb. I stream on Twitch. All of the things I will mention are under that same name.
Awesome.
I stream on Twitch. I write a blog about gaming and where it intersects with all kinds of things called Blast Professing. I have DJ'd on FM radio on WRFG in Atlanta for a while. I used to run these big public sort of pop-up arcade events, specifically in LGBTQIA2+ spaces because I am definitely not straight. But also I worked with a lot of other DJs, with breweries, with artists, and we would kind of make these like public experiences.
Yeah.
And my part of it was the arcade. So I would bring a bunch of TVs and a bunch of consoles, either original hardware or modded or some fashion of that, and set them up so that people could play them in public places like bars, cafes, libraries, stores, parties, whatever. And I feel like that's how most people know me.
Sure.
I make art and I make music, and I definitely do a lot of ranting on the internet. But I think, my arcade business and streaming are kind of like my things, I would say.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
I love hearing about that too. I think this is not an original thought, but I love any chance you can get people together to play games or give someone a chance to like hop on a console that they maybe haven't seen in years or never have seen. What's that like when you're working an event like that or setting something up? I assume it's a joyful thing.
Oh yeah. Oh, so I think the biggest arcade I did was at an event called Controllerize. It was like a Monday thing in Atlanta, and basically it was like anywhere from 400 to 600 people every Monday in this big warehouse.
Wow.
And I got to a point where I had 16 screens, and it was basically most arcade games on one of those like what do they call them? They call them like Pandora's boxes, where it's like an arcade chassis that you buy that has two sticks and you plug it into HDMI and it just has all the games.
Yes.
They're not the best versions of it, but it worked for that. You know what
Totally.
I mean? And then I would have basically some way to play just about every console from Atari all the way through PS4.
Okay.
And multiples of each. So like there'd be like 4 Wiis that were all modded with whatever. There'd be 2 Dreamcasts. There'd be 3 PS4s. There'd be 3 Switches, etc.
Wow.
And it was a ton of fun. And like you said, like it's such a joyous thing to watch people connect over gaming. I think, movies and music and books are obviously, fantastic expressions of human emotion and lore and literature. But I think gaming is kind of like that extra X factor because it takes all of them and puts them into something that you can actually control.
Totally.
And so many people would come up and just, like time after time I would hear, oh, I haven't seen this game in forever. Or like, oh, do you have this random game from Super Nintendo or something? And my goal was kind of to strive to make sure I had every single game that somebody could possibly ask for.
Sure.
It was challenging at times. Some people would ask for very obscure things, but it kind of like, in addition to already being like a gamer nerd, I took that as a challenge of like, okay, I'm going to seek out these games I don't know. I'm going to find this other stuff and kind of let the crowd widen my taste in gaming. So
that's really fun. Oh, that sounds great. I mean, I know I totally led you into that by asking if it was joyful, but I felt so much sincerity from you. And there's almost feels like there's very few ways that couldn't be so much fun. I'm sure you see all sorts of people, whether it's like you were talking about someone asking about an obscure game or a game that they used to play who wants to revisit that, or someone just like hopping on and trying something out as well.
Yeah. A lot of times I would, at the beginning of every event, I would make sure to put on specific games that would kind of catch people's eyes.
Great. Yeah.
Something new, because a lot of younger folks are very, like, how do I put it? Some people play games and they only want to play what's now. They're only interested in like what's cutting edge, what video games are doing currently. They want that. Other people are like, I want to go back into a time machine and fall into my nostalgia abyss and just like enjoy this thing from when I was 8, in the 90s. And other people don't care. They just want to play something, or they just want to see something maybe they haven't seen before. So, I might have, a Mario Kart and a Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and a Tekken 7 at the time. But then, to the side, I'd also have like a Rez or like a Nanotech Warrior or like a Devil Dice or like something a little bit more weird or obscure, or maybe it's a game that somebody only rented like once or twice at Blockbuster back in the day. And yeah, I mean, just getting to spelunk these libraries for a business was really, really fantastic. And just, again, gaming to me is so important because it bridges all these gaps. It bridges gaps across gender, across race, across belief, across upbringing. If you are, any amount of relatively privileged enough to experience video games in your lifetime, or especially when you were a kid and your parents could afford that sort of thing, I feel like there are just all these like invisible ties and bonds that we share with each other across gaming that sometimes music and movies and comics can't really touch. It's kind of hard to explain exactly how much deeper it is, but I've definitely had just some great connections with people over the fact that we both remember this game from 1995 or something,
Yeah, I can relate to that so much. And I think, you've hit on it a couple times, but just the strength of connection, of like a connection you can have with someone because of games is like fantastic. And like, the whole reason that I even do this show, it's like because it is that sort of avenue for me to get to do that with people. And you're expressing a very similar thing on your end.
Yeah, very much. That's part of the reason why I was like, oh my God, Connor, I know you don't know me, but I need to be on your show and talk about this.
Yes.
Part of that is because I feel like you get it. And many gamers do, don't get me wrong. But it's not that common to hear people talking about games on a level that is sort of like around the games. You definitely go into detail about games. There's so many episodes I can name that I really enjoyed because you dug in so far, both on like a mechanic level of like the actual game development sort of thing, and then on this other level of like, what this means to you, what your setup was like, what your
Mhm.
parents and your life was like at the time, like
Yeah.
what you were going through when you were playing this. Like those things are just so important. I can't stress that enough. I feel like you totally get it. If you haven't already thought about it, at some point, this should be a book. So
Oh, that's an
do that.
interesting idea. And thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
For
Yeah.
sure.
What was I had a thought while you were sharing, but uh all that aside, thank you so much. And yeah, again, so excited to have you on. Is there anything
Thank you.
that you haven't gotten to share about yourself that you want the listener to know before we keep moving on?
Okay, so the main link that I would share with everyone is linktr.ee/GaymerHerb. Linktree, of course. That Linktree has a ginormous glut of information and personal projects. A lot of social resources, LGBTQIA2+ resources, several projects I've worked on. I used to do a stream called 5 Games Under $5 where I went through 350 plus indie games on the Switch and would review them. And
Oh,
there's a link
wow.
to all of that on there. There's a bunch of free games on there that you can play that a lot of people don't talk about that are just out there waiting on the internet to be played for free. And a bunch of other stuff. Like that's where anything is going down that is me, it is on the Linktree.
Yeah, well, that's great. I'll be sure to have a link in the show notes as well to your link tree so that
you.
people can just, of course, so people can just click that and jump over there as well. I remembered the thing that I had forgotten before we move on. The one thing, talking about the episodes of this podcast, I often am, I'll occasionally have a thought where I'm like, I'm sure there's somebody tuning into this episode that was really hoping for like a deep dive breakdown on Soul Calibur 2, and they're not getting that. And I'm okay with that because I know what this show is, and I'm very clear about that. But I do. That's the only thing that like sometimes in the back of my head, I'm like, oh man, they're gonna want to know more about. I can't even think of a Soul Calibur 2 character's name.
Kalik.
Yes. But again, people, if you listen to the show, then it's generally not about the deep details of a game, although it is very important.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're about to get into your general history with games. But before we do that, will you please introduce what you've brought on for later and call me by your game?
So the game today that I'm talking about is Rocket Knight Adventures. It came out in 1993. It is by Konami. It's for the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive, depending on where you are in the world. It is one of my favorite games of all time. I would definitely put it in the top 20 somewhere.
Ooh.
I don't have an order for that, but
Yeah.
in the top 20, like this is the kind of game that I can just play endlessly and it never gets old.
I love that. Something else that, you may have picked up on or the listener might pick up on the show is that, like, people aren't necessarily, like, you don't necessarily bring on your favorite game to the podcast. When I say you, I mean the whoever the guest is. But that's kind of the fun of it is, like, it's a game that hits you in the right time. But we also have people who bring on their favorite games and are very, very upfront about that. But I can't wait to hear about Rocket Knight Adventures from you and what that game means to you. But let's get into your history with games in general. Do you remember like one of the earliest times that you took an interest in gaming?
Okay, so I have a complicated history. The first game I ever remember playing was Tetris on Game Boy.
Nice.
I'm not quite 40 yet. I'm almost there.
Hey, early congrats.
Thank you. But the interesting thing is that I went to the same elementary school that my dad had gone to.
Okay.
So there was still like all this like leftover tech from the 70s, from the 80s. And even though I'm an 80s baby, my generation really should be like Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, which it is. But
yes.
In elementary school, we had all this older tech. So, at home, I had only Game Boy until a certain point, and then we got a Genesis. But at school, it was the raddest thing. We had an Atari 800, we had a Commodore 64, and we had an Apple IIe. And all of those are technically before my time, but because I was young, because, at the time, at least for us, we didn't necessarily go out and get all the new stuff immediately all the time. It was kind of like, you've talked about it on the show before. We may get one game for our birthday or for Christmas, maybe twice a year, maybe if you're lucky. And the rest of the time was all rentals.
Yes.
So getting to just like dive into different games at school, they would give us like time after class or time when there was low time, downtime, excuse me. Or like we would use these computers to learn how to like type or how to do math or how to do, little programs, little functions. But for whatever reason, many of these computers also contain really great games. So, Asteroids and Missile Command and Number Munchers and Odell Lake and Pitfall and like all this other stuff. I kind of got like a history lesson on that before my time. And that always made me feel like I look back on that time and I'm really grateful for it because not that there's anything wrong with, wanting new things, but I think especially when it comes to tech, it's a privilege to have like a sort of first person experience and just respect for like the older tech and where all this stuff came from. Some of my greatest memories were playing Atari with other kids and having these very hard, you got to push them real hard, those sticks, and they squeak and stuff. And it's not like there's never a sense of perfect control. You always feel like sometimes you push it and it'll go. And other times, if you didn't push it exactly as hard as last time, it might not go and you might die, it just, things were a little, I'm not going to say sloppier, but older tech and older video games, there was definitely like a feel to it that is just different. And all that to say, I'm just very glad I got that experience before I dived headfirst into like the future of games, because I think if you never played things like Atari or Commodore or ColecoVision or Vectrix or any of those games, if you go back to those now, having never done that, it's really hard.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a totally different scale, but I can relate to that, growing up. And while I should have been a Super Nintendo kid or an N64, well, I was an N64 kid eventually, but I started off with the original Nintendo. And I think there's a chance that if I didn't grow up with that, that I may have not had a continued interest or appreciation for the older stuff, which is probably why I think you and I can probably relate on, loving to dive back into history of games and new stuff. So I can relate to you there, but that's so cool. What an amazing just coincidence that like happened to be present at your school that sort of, I don't know if changed the trajectory of your life, but like set you on a path for the types of games you could enjoy.
Yeah, the types of games, and also sort of like this very deep understanding, or at least it felt deep at the time, of like the origins, the roots. Because I feel like, don't get me wrong, I'm always probably going to be a Sega kid. I love Nintendo. I have every Xbox, I have every PlayStation. Like I'm all for all the games on whatever's fun, whatever works. But I will say that I have major respect. As much as Atari screwed up the industry at the time, I have major respect for like the ground that they paved, as well as like the Japanese arcade scene, SNK, Neo Geo, all of that stuff. Like they were doing stuff that took not only a while to get to consoles, but a while to get to like, I don't know. In the 80s and 90s, if you were a gamer, like that wasn't a term. Nobody said gamer. You were like a nerd that plays video games. You were a geek that plays video games. And I feel like there was just all this groundwork being laid already from the late 70s, all the way up. And I feel like if you ask most people when they started with games that are over 35, let's say, they'll probably say Nintendo or Sega. And that's great. And that's wonderful. But I guess my whole spiel here is urging people to go back. There's other stuff.
There's a history before that.
Yeah. And some of it, like most of those games are quick experiences, but many of them are great multiplayer experiences. And just, even just going back to a game like Adventure, You can see the seed in adventure is what led to Zelda, to Horizon Zero Dawn, to Breath of the Wild, to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you know?
Yeah.
So anyway.
No, that's fantastic. Gosh, I had a question for you. Oh, do you happen to be a fan of the sort of interactive documentary experiences that Digital Eclipse has been making the last few years? Are you familiar with these? Like the Atari Archive or
the Atari 50 thing?
Yes.
It's so good. It's like this is such a great way to get people to understand, like, it wasn't just a fun game. This was like revolutionizing entertainment in people's houses.
Yeah.
This was blowing people's minds. This was like, wait a minute, you can control something on the television, you know, television that had already been around for 40 years or more. Like, now you can actually move something on the TV. It was mind blowing, you know?
I was just hearing you talk about that. I was like, I bet this is something that would, you know, pique your interest. And that was right. They also came out with, I'm going to get back to your history so soon, but they came out with the making of Karateka. Did you see this last year?
No, and you should totally share it with me.
Yes.
Okay.
I still have not played this game or this experience, but it's another sort of interactive documentary about the making of that game and Jordan Mechner, and it's amazing. And they just actually announced that they're coming out with one about the game creator Jeff Minter.
Okay.
So anyway, a lot of cool stuff out there. I'll try to remember to send that to you. The making of Karateka.
Cool.
But back to your history. So we've got this great foundation that sort of, it sounds like, was mostly developed because of the tech at your school.
Yeah.
Where did you go from here as a game enjoyer?
So at home, it was Game Boy. My sister had a Game Boy.
That's right.
She let me play it when I was like 3. I remember playing Tetris, and then I remember.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, Tetris, and she had Wizards and Warriors, and she had what is it? The Fist of the North Star fighting game, which is a crap fighting game. But you know, being 4 or 3 years old, it was kind of just like, oh, you know, amazing. It didn't really matter how good it was as a game. And then at some point we got a Genesis, and for whatever reason, I'm not sure exactly why, but when we got the Genesis, my parents let me have this itty bitty little like 10-inch TV in my room for like, I'm gonna say a year, just for like a little while. Like it's like a blip in my memory. But then I remember a time after that where I went back to not having a TV until I was a teen. So it was kind of like, I don't know, maybe they were like, we're gonna give him this. And then they realized, oh, he likes this too much. We can't leave it in his room.
Yes.
You know? But yeah, so Game Boy and Genesis at home, old computers at school. And then I definitely spent at least a decent third of the 90s in some kind of arcade.
Wow.
There was a really cool, I'm from Miami, Florida originally.
Okay.
There was a really cool arcade and skating rink there called Hot Wheels. And I used to go to like a sort of like a day camp in a neighborhood nearby. And on Wednesdays, they would take us to Hot Wheels.
Oh, that rules.
Yeah. And it was one of those places where, like, of course, the skating rink was wooden, but the rest of the place was like that real hard carpet that you could still skate on really comfortably. But if you fell, you'd be fine. Like, you know? So I used to skate through the arcade because it was kind of like on a little slope.
Yeah.
And they had, oh my God, they had Alien vs. Predator. They had Musha, which is one of the best shoot 'em ups of all time. They had Street Fighter 1 and 2.
Oh my goodness.
They had Magic Sword. They had I want to say Afterburner, but it wasn't the one where you get inside the chassis and the whole thing moves. It was just the stand-up one, but it was still cool. And then that's all I really remember from that one. And then we also used to go to a place called Flippers in Miami. Flippers had, I guess that was later. That was like probably 97, 98, but they had Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. They had Killer Instinct, and they had this game called T-Mech, where it was like 8 different machines that you're sitting in this like mech display, and you're all in a game together. They're all networked, and you're in a game together that kind of looks like Doom, but you're in hovercrafts and you shoot each other. It was so cool.
That's amazing.
And
oh my goodness.
I guess there's only one console port of T-Mech, and it's on the 32X, which nobody except for me had, I guess. So T-Mech is just one of those things that's kind of like lost.
Dang! Did that game? Do you know if it happened to be ported with the sort of Sega? And actually, I might be conflating the 32X with the Sega CD. But you know how they made the additional mini console for the Genesis that was like the CD games?
Yeah. Right. They were 2 different things, but oddly
Yes.
enough, like there was Genesis, Sega CD, and 32X, and some
Yes.
games required that you had all of it to make those work.
Wild! Oh my goodness!
Yeah, the amount of attachments we were dealing with in the 90s, like it was insane. They were like, just buy this other plastic piece of thing and put it on your other plastic thing, and you can play these games now.
Maybe it was like, okay, this will be more appealing than making parents buy a brand new console or something like that.
Right. It was kind of like sort of like the Lego mentality of like, well, if you just piece it together, it becomes a new toy.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I never had a Genesis myself, but I briefly went to a daycare, like an after-school daycare when I was about 10. And they had like basically those attachments. So that was the first time I ever saw those things. That was really the end of the story.
I was gonna say that's another great. So I used to go to an after school daycare.
Yes.
I don't remember when that was. That was probably around late elementary school, middle school. And I used to go. It was like a nationwide chain. It's called La Petite, and at La Petite.
Sounds fancy.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. They're all over the place now, though, I guess, or they were.
Huh.
At La Petite, they had an NES, and it was like the cruelest thing ever because they only had 3 games.
Oh.
And all 3 were 1-player games. So basically, it was like us kids at this daycare and just kind of having to like wait in line basically.
Yeah.
And you know how kids are. It's like, well, you just died right there. It's my turn. And it's like, right, but I just died in the first pit. I died after 5 seconds of play. It can't be your turn yet. It's still my turn. That whole thing. All they had was TMNT, the first one that really sucks.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Great music, don't get me wrong, but very brutal
I
game.
have nostalgia for that game, despite it being brutal.
It's brutal, yeah. So they had TMNT, they had Zelda 2, which is another very brutal 1-player game. And then they just had Mario 1, which is another relatively brutal 1-player game. So my experience with NES, other than like, maybe going to like a friend's house or like, you know how when you're a kid, it's like, I'm not going to say I had a lot of friends when I was a kid. I was definitely an ADHD child, all the stigma that comes with that, the pills, the nurse visits, all that. And I think this is kind of a different topic, but I think that's part of why gaming always appealed to me so much because I felt so like out of control in the structure of society and education, and video games gave me a place where I can control something.
Wow. Yeah.
It gave me kind of like I don't know, like a fantasy world where there was no consequence for being late or for falling down a hole other than a game over and then you start over again. No big deal,
Yes.
But yeah, so the daycare, the school, at home, there were kind of games everywhere.
That's awesome.
And I feel very fortunate for that because I know that like obviously, to play video games at all is a privilege, but I definitely, even with the limited amount of games that I got per year, I think, just to have that, to be able to have that experience, I'm eternally grateful. Sometimes I wonder if I hadn't gamed then and I became an adult before I gamed, would I really be into them? So I'm glad it happened when it did, put it that way.
Yes, absolutely. Well, that's great. That's such like a unique, at least for the podcast, a fairly unique foundation that we've got to hear about for you. Sort of starting your gaming journey with those different influences. I love that. Got some questions for you about your history with gaming though that I want to get into. You were mentioning that you eventually, it's at a certain point also got into the Xbox as well.
Oh yeah.
When I would love to know, as a Sega kid, were you present and aware of the fall of the Dreamcast? And did that affect you? Is that where your turn came? I'd love to hear about that.
The Dreamcast is my favorite console to this day, still.
Oh!
I was going to pick something on Dreamcast, but someone, I believe, already did Jet Set Radio.
I don't. You know what? You may have been able to pick it. It may be. I don't think we've done that one, actually.
Well, that was going to be my second one.
Oh, okay, cool.
But, I could go on a whole thing about Sega.
Well, were you heartbroken when that happened? Like, do you remember it all?
So, Sega... Like, just as a general statement, okay, Nintendo was always timeless. I want to emphasize timeless. Sega was always cool.
Yes.
Nintendo was not cool. Sega was not timeless. They had their corners. They had their thing down.
I've never heard that distinction before, but I'm gonna run with it. I love that.
You know what I mean? Like, Sega had the black consoles, and we all know black is cooler.
Yes.
And Sega was just, I don't know, it's like, not only did they have a huge presence in the arcade business, the arcade was basically Sega, Namco, Taito, and SNK. I mean, Atari, I guess you could say, but not exactly. And I feel like Sega was always trying to bring that arcade experience home, whereas Nintendo was doing home entertainment for the family.
Yes.
And I like both of those, but the reason why Dreamcast hurt so much is because Sega represented like this secret third thing. It wasn't like for the family. It wasn't like trying to sort of like please the PMRC at the time. It wasn't trying to surrender to conservative politics. And we all know, I mean, Sega's a company just like any other company.
Sure.
And I would be remiss if I didn't say one time in this podcast that just last year, Sega laid off like 40% of its staff in Japan because they tried to unionize. So Sega's still a company.
Yes.
But at the time, they just represented this very like wild card. It was like Nintendo was very tried and true. And Sega was kind of like, you just couldn't tell what the hell they were going to do next. They kept throwing different things at the wall. Different characters, different ideas, different attachments. They had the Sega Activator in the 90s, which was the ring that you plug into your Genesis, you put it on the floor, and when you step in the ring, it shoots infrared lasers up so that when you put your hands over it, it like is motion control, so to speak.
That's right.
And just all kinds of shit. They were doing all kinds of stuff that was just like, I mean, the game we're talking about today came out in 93. That was the year Virtua Fighter debuted, the first 3D fighter. And when you look at Virtua Fighter in 93, and you look at every other game that was out on console in 93, it was mind-blowing. It was like 3D's here. We didn't really get it on console fully until like 95, 96, 97.
Yeah.
But it was there. Sega, 93, they were on it. And I feel like by the time the Dreamcast came out, I think in America specifically, they had already kind of ruined their reputation with gamers because the 32X was a flop, the Neptune never happened, and the Saturn only got a quarter of its library in the US. The rest of it was all in Japan. So like, you know, I think as an American gamer, I think our perception of Sega was skewed. And behind the scenes, Sega of America and Sega of Japan were never getting along. They could never decide on anything. And by the time the Dreamcast came out, it was like only the diehards were really excited about it. Only the people who had waited for that fabled 3D Sonic that we were promised. That, don't get me wrong, Sonic 3D Blast is a cool game, but from Sonic and Knuckles to Sonic Adventure, there was this giant gap of like, where's the 3D Sonic game?
Yeah.
Where's the Mario 64, but for Sonic? And Sonic R was not that, and Sonic Jam was not that, and Sonic 3D Blast was not that. And I like those games, but it was just kind of like, the Dreamcast was coming, and we were like, holy shit. This next-gen thing. It has a modem. You could play MP3 CDs on it. It had a webcam in Japan. It had a keyboard hookup. Like,
it's got a mini-looking Game Boy thing you put
in the controller. Yeah, we were like, oh shit. But I think that was mainly most of us fans that had never stopped liking Sega. For everyone else, it was like PlayStation 2 was looming on the horizon, and it was going to play DVDs. And I don't know. I mean, I can't remember his name off the top of my head because I'm bad with names, but the original, not the original, but the former president of Sega at the time, there's a story, you can look it up out there. He basically bailed Sega out after they started to go bankrupt, after they started to have money issues. He donated like $1 billion of his own dollars.
Wow.
To bail Sega out to make sure that they could continue to be a third-party developer after the Dreamcast had tanked. And then he passed away like 6 months after he did that. It was like this weird sort of I don't know if there was like a conspiracy. I don't know what was going on, but Sega has like a really weird history. And yes, to answer your question from the beginning, it was heartbreaking because, I don't know. I mean, ultimately, it was probably the right move for Sega because now they're still around. And even just in 2020, they were like, I think they were like Publisher of the Year on Metacritic because they've got Atlas, they've got Persona, they've got Yakuza, they've got Valkyria Chronicles, they've got 2 Point Hospital, they've got Sonic. They're still doing great. They're still doing fine. Even Super Monkey Ball got like a redo.
Yeah.
So I feel like they're doing fine, but at the time it just felt like that moment in Star Wars where Alderaan is destroyed by the Death Star, and it's just like you feel like, oh no, this wild voice in gaming, this very unhinged, unmitigated, uncropped, unkempt, sort of force in AAA gaming, which we didn't even call it AAA then, has died. We were like, oh no, it's only going to be Microsoft and Sony and Nintendo now. Like, who's going to fill in that gap that Sega does? But as it turns out, Sega has continued to fill in the gap just on different systems.
Yeah, thankfully they didn't. They weren't reliant on being, having their own console to do that, and that they continue to flourish. I was having a thought about that too, of some of the exciting stuff that's even to come for Sega in the next few years. It's like so much to look forward to.
Right, like Infinite Wealth just came out. Persona 3 Reload just came out, which I know is Atlas, but just having those things even under Sega as a publisher is so important for their brand because it keeps the momentum of Sega going.
Yes.
I don't think they're the same company that we knew in the 90s. It's like totally different teams of people now, totally different politics now. But I feel like, don't get me wrong, again, I can hear someone already saying it like, oh, you're a Sega kid, everything else sucks, right? No. I love Atari. I love NEC, who made TurboGrafx and PC Engine. I was a big fan of that. I love SNK and all their Neo Geo lines. I love Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo in their own ways. But there was always something very punk rock, very avant-garde about Sega's approach to things. I'm not going to say that those weren't clever marketing tools. I'm not going to say that didn't work on me, because it did. But I will say that they pushed the boundaries of what gaming could be, and that pushed Nintendo to be their best selves. So many times people will talk about the console wars, right? And I feel like Nintendo had to extend themselves and get so damn good because Sega was like, hey, you're not the only kid on the block. And ended up getting that like 51% share of the market in the early 90s. And so Nintendo was like, holy shit, we gotta stamp this shit out. We gotta do something about that. And then of course we get Donkey Kong Country, we get Link to the Past, we get Chrono Trigger, all that stuff. So I feel like there was this great sort of tug of war between those two companies that only benefited the gamers. We got paid. We got the goods because they were fighting over who was cooler.
It's one of those things too that, like, I hope at least sort of the spirit of that continues to live on in the games industry, for as long as it can. I want to say that a lot of that almost like spirit, even if it's different, even if it's not the same thing that, same exact spirit that Sega sort of had or led with, that like the indie sort of like market and developers are the ones doing that at this point, I think.
Absolutely. And I feel like it's not a stretch to say that not entirely, but I do think Sega, if you ask any person in gaming who is of a certain age enough to remember when Sega was good, quote unquote, when they were still doing hardware, I feel like Sega kind of opened the door in a lot of ways for just the concept in a developer's brain that, this can work as a game. This idea can happen. It may not sell 1 million copies. It may not do that well, but this can work. A lot of times I feel like people forget that, just a quick history lesson. Atari, kind of pushed gaming in America from the get-go, even though they weren't the first. The Magnavox Odyssey was first, and Intellivision was out there and all that stuff. But Atari pushed games in America. Then they started losing their quality control, and they started allowing games that were basically shit to be released without any sort of, it was kind of like, when you scroll through the eShop now, or you scroll through your mobile games now.
Gosh,
that's how Atari looked in the I'm going to say the early 80s. It started to just get bad. It wasn't that there weren't good games, it's that there was all this shovelware, all this crap. And they would push it at the same price with the same emphasis on marketing as the good games. So people started to distrust Atari, to be able to tell them what a good game was, to be able to trust them on where they put their money. And Nintendo came in, swooped in, and did the Nintendo seal of quality, which really put games back on the map as no, these are quality experiences for your family. We've tested these, we've tried these, we know they're good. And we all know the entire NES library is not a seal of quality.
Yeah, totally.
But I'm going to say that the ratio of bad games to good games with Atari got flipped around for Nintendo, because NES does have just bangers, tons of bangers. Whereas Atari, if I were to go back now and tell you to play banger games on Atari, it's probably about 10 games out of the entire thing. They're great, but don't get me wrong. But I think the reason why I bring that up is because what happened was that Nintendo, in order to maintain that perception from the public eye, from the consumer, of being sort of a seal of quality, an excellence, a luxury, in order to do that, they forced their devs and their third parties to do lots of things, to cut corners, to have crunch. We didn't call it crunch back then, but they definitely had people sleeping up, working 72 hours to get these games out on release day. They would kind of heavily censor games. Mortal Kombat's the greatest example of how, Mortal Kombat on Super Nintendo had dust or sweat, and Sega had blood. And so I feel like Nintendo is an escapable, ubiquitous, what's the word? They're an escapable, ubiquitous presence in gaming, and well-deserved influence in gaming. Don't get me wrong. But Sega was kind of like this seemingly also big company that was like an underdog. And they were just trying things that just weren't happening on Nintendo. It was like Nintendo, it's not that they didn't have good games, it's that their pool of games that they would allow would kind of only fit into so many categories. And Sega was like, well, what if there was also these other categories that you would never do? And I think that's why, to anybody who's, 21 right now, they'd probably be like, why is Sega such a big deal? Who cares? It's just some old game company. But at the time, Nintendo felt, I don't know if this is a good comparison, but they kind of felt like the church.
Sure.
Not exactly. I mean, there's plenty of wild games across Nintendo and Super Nintendo and all of their consoles. Don't get me wrong. But it just felt very, they always played it safe. Safe. And Sega was like, you could just tell by some of the games they released that they didn't necessarily care if it sold. It was kind of just like, we just want to push the whole medium forward. So here's 15 weird ass games you're never going to play on anything else. Here you go. And here's a bunch of perfect arcade conversions too. Have those while you're at it, So yeah.
Dang. That honestly was it's such a more in-depth answer than I was even expecting, just talking about, the fall of the Dreamcast, but honestly a really fun sort of history lesson for us today. And you can see the ripple effects to this day. I have two more questions for you about your history with gaming. The first of which is being someone who has gamed, seemingly your whole life for as what I've gathered at this point. Have you had like a lull for you, or what I refer to as the dark period, where you have been either not really gamed or gamed mostly casually or taken a step away?
Oh my. I have not stopped regularly gaming possibly ever, but
Nice.
I will say most people that know me know I'm like a big fighting game person.
Oh.
And currently I am on a hiatus from fighting games, not because I don't love them, but because I think this is the best way to answer your question, because it's the closest thing that applies.
Sure.
So pre-pandemic, I was doing these arcade events for about 7 years.
Yes.
I did them in Ohio. I did them in Georgia. And really, before that, my parents were kind of always people that hosted parties. So
Okay.
I grew up being like, let me think of the best way to make friends. The best way to make friends is to throw the party, tell them to bring one thing, and I
Yes.
have, just come over to my place. Don't worry about it. You don't have to host.
Totally.
Come
You
party.
host.
Right. So that being said, it's just like at my events, I would have all kinds of games, but fighting games definitely got like played a lot because they're quick, they're easy, and everybody loves Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, so they can just pick it up and immediately get into it. And then I'd have some rare stuff, Bloody Roar or Toe Ball or whatever, Fighter's History or whatever. And like, I think after doing that for so long in person, and then immediately in 2020, I switched over to, like, I had already been streaming, but I switched my entire focus of streaming over to Twitch, my whole business to Twitch. And between 2020 and 2022, there was a period where I streamed every single day for 285 days in a row.
Whoa.
It was a lot.
Dang.
I would not recommend it. I would not recommend it. And just a little tidbit for the streamers out there. Keep streaming, okay? Have fun with it. Do what you want to do with it. Make the space your own, but realize that the business model that Twitch has is not sustainable. It really isn't. I know people who have 500 plus subs and they're still struggling to pay bills and they have to have another job too. So like, I'm just saying, I do love streaming. I do think it's great. It has benefited me in so many ways. But even after 285 days in a row, I was kind of like, wow, okay, so this can't be a job.
Totally. Yeah, you have to be just an even higher echelon than the one you were referring to do that.
Yeah, you have to like run yourself ragged essentially, and you have to get lucky. You have to know the right people. You have to do the right things. You have to schmooze. All that. So I switched over. When COVID happened, I switched over to doing streaming all the time, and part of that was doing a fight night every single Monday for like all of that time, like for 4 years straight, basically for the last 4 years. I stopped at the beginning of this year, and it's, I think, for multiple reasons. I love fighting games, but there is kind of a pit that you fall into when every game that you're playing boils down to win or lose. Because,
I see.
Because what it means is that if you're winning, someone has to lose. If you're losing, someone has to win. And it's just kind of like, I used to play Quake 3 Arena. I used to play Unreal Tournament. I've had my competitive, gaming days. I used to just like, anybody who would come up to me for Street Fighter Alpha 3 or Third Strike or any of that, I would just like destroy. Like, I used to be on that level, but as I've gotten older, I don't know. I know this is a long answer. I'm sorry.
No, you're all good.
I just feel like in 2024 specifically, I made a pact with myself that I was not going to buy any new games this year. And by new games, I mean, I will still buy games, but my cutoff is that they've got to be on sale $10 or under. And I know that sounds really cheap, but there are a lot of great games under $10 right now.
Wario 64 is always telling me when those things are out there.
Oh my God. It's like the deals are madness now. They're all every week. I just got Klonoa 1 and 2 on Switch for $10. I got Neo, the World Ends With You for $10 physical. I got Super Monkey Ball Banana Mania on Xbox physical for $7. The deals are nuts right now.
Okay.
I could go on a whole diatribe. Um, so- but I think this year I just kind of want to like focus on my backlog.
Sure.
Focus on games that I've already spent money on. Focus on really amazing fan-made and indie projects, stuff that's on like itch.io, stuff that's on
Mm.
GameJolt, Fightcade, Parsec, all that stuff. Like there's so many good games to play. And, you know, there's that stat out there about how like, 80% of video games from the past aren't available on current services. That is true. But if we're talking about like not doing things the exact suggested way, uh, there's never been a better time to play games now. Now in 10 seconds, you can find an emulator for Sega CD and play Snatcher from Hideo Kojima if you want to.
Yes.
You know, you can play, currently on stream, I've been going through Blood Omen Legacy of Kain, and somebody made an incredible patch for it that basically cuts all the load times. So the game has 0 loading.
Oh, wow.
It puts full subtitles in for every single situation where someone's talking. The point is, right now, there has never been a more accessible time to play the games if you have a PC. You're good. If you have a PC, you can play basically anything from ever.
Yeah.
And I just want to like emphasize that, because while these streaming services and these subscription services are convenient, and I know you've talked about this before, like the Nintendo Switch Online, I'm not going to say it's not cool. Is it cool that I
Yeah.
can play multiplayer Mario Kart from Super Nintendo with someone on my Switch? Hell yeah, it's awesome. Is it cool that they add new games all the time? Of course. But those of us who played on the Wii, I mean, even the Wii in 2007 had a better virtual console than what we're getting right now. Like,
Yeah.
like they're stringing us along little by little, and like, of course I'm gonna get Nintendo Switch Online because I play Smash Brothers and I play Mario Kart 8. So
Yeah.
like, I need to get those if I want to play online. But I just feel like, all that to say, that entire preface is just to say that this year I've decided to kind of like shift my priorities when it comes to my level of consumerism.
Yeah, definitely.
I think as gamers, you can't avoid consumerism, but I think there's a difference between buying only games under $10 that are on sale for a whole year and buying a brand new $70 game every single month.
Yes, that's true.
Like there's
Big time.
We all have bills to pay,
Yeah, I think that's going to yield. I'll be so interested to hear from you as the year goes on, or even near the end of the year, how, like, what your thoughts are on this calling it an experiment might be reductive, but this journey you're going to be on this year, that's so interesting. And I think it's something that, like, I have, at least with friends, have joked before, like, oh, we don't need any new games. Look at all this stuff I already got to play. But, when something gets delayed, because I really can't, I don't really care when that happens generally.
Same.
Even if I'm looking forward to something, I'm like, that's fine. There's plenty of stuff I've not touched that I have.
Yeah.
So good on you. I feel like you're going to be, going on this journey that a lot of people are going to, like myself, wish we will do, but never do.
I think it's not easy to resist marketing, but as a person that has, we all, anyone on earth, but especially Americans, we have grown up in marketing, and I feel like, there's a lot of different ways to kind of like do the right thing, and it may sound like splitting hairs or being minimal or whatever, but I feel like something every human being could use right now, with everything that's happening in the world that we don't even have to get into. We could use a bit more of that sort of like appreciating what you already have. Like we could really use a bit more humbling in our desires and how like out of control they can be sometimes. And I say this as a person who's looking at a wall covered in physical games. I have multiple binders. I have terabytes full of digital stuff. Like I'm not exempt from it, but I feel like I've done it for so long. I've had that day one shit. I used to wait out in line at GameStop. I used to I've been on that for so long that I feel like, what am I doing when my backlog is so big now that I had to actually
Yeah.
do a wheel on stream to spin to pick 5 random games because it's so
Yes.
massive. You know, like
Truly. I wonder, like, well, I especially in 2020 and even a year after that, I would say, went through such a heavy period of like, oh, I'm interested in this, and it's not that it's a reasonable price. I'll pick it up for sure. And now I'm at this place where I'm looking, like you said, at sort of a wall of games that I try now at this point to be like, do I really need this? Am I going to play it like now? I even say that having bought a game last week that I probably won't play in a while. I got this is Hyper Light Drifter on the PS4 right behind me. That
nice.
I probably should have just bought on Steam for $15, but
Great game.
so you know what? I'm excited to give it a shot at some point, but the problem is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is in my PS5 right now, and I bought a physical copy of this. So, but that's amazing, and I feel like it coincidentally covered what I was going to continue to ask you about, which is just like what you're looking forward to getting into. But it sounds like you're kind of there. Is there a game that you, and I apologize if you've already mentioned it, are you playing anything right now that you're having a lot of fun with?
So I'm playing multiple things right now. I'll try to make it quick.
Cool.
I have 2 partners, Pete and Lucas. We used to have a Twitch channel called Three Bears Gaming for a long time.
Yeah.
So we kind of split off, and when we moved across the country, I decided to keep going with my own streaming thing.
Sure.
And so we still play games together, just offline. Pete and I right now are playing through the Lego Star Wars Complete Saga.
Oh, fun.
Because specifically, they did not do a modern release of that. So the only way to play it is to either bust out a PS2 or an old school Xbox, or to download it on a modern Xbox. But it's the 360 title. So in July, when that goes kaput, you won't be able to get it anymore, and it's very cheap. And a lot of people don't seem to realize, but the Lego Star Wars Complete Saga is 1 through 6. Like, it is all of the Star Wars movies before the newer trilogy.
Yes.
Whereas the re-release that they came out with, it's called Lego Star Wars The Skywalker Saga.
Mm-hmm.
That one, if you were to read the back of the box, you would think that it's a remake of the Complete Saga, but it's not. It's a totally different game that's open world and much more like Lego Dimensions. So if you want that classic co-op that was on PS2 where it's 2 players and you go through all the Star Wars together, the Complete Saga is only... it's technically the Xbox 360 title, but you can get it on Xbox One and Xbox Series.
I inherited just a handful of games from a friend last year who was like, hey, I'm never going to play these PS1 and PS2 games. Do you want them? And so that only added to this, this pile that we keep discussing.
Yeah.
But unfortunately wasn't the, what's the name of the one that you're playing again?
It's Lego Star Wars Complete Saga.
The Complete Saga. I'm pretty sure what I have is a PS3 version of the original trilogy.
Oh, cool. I mean, that's great, though. Yeah.
Yeah, which is still something. And I will see the red case occasionally and be like, I want to bust that out. But so anyway, I use that to talk about myself. But that's so cool that you're playing it right now.
Yeah, it's a great game. And it's one of those games that's like, it's not like a hardcore game. It's not a, coming from like a history of fighting games, it's not like, a tough guy game, right? Whatever that means. But I will say that Lego Star Wars is one of those games that it is the perfect co-op experience, especially if you want to play with someone who doesn't play a lot of video games. It's a great thing that bridges the ties between different skill levels. Plus, there's like a absolute metric ton of secrets, and just to show for Lego Star Wars, the Complete Saga lets you mix and match characters, so you could be like Princess like Windu, or you could be like Chew Solo, or like whatever. You can mix all the characters together.
Moving pieces of Lego characters around,
and you can make like a single character that has all of the special abilities of all the character pieces that you put on them. So like you could jump high and use a grapple hook and have a blaster and have a lightsaber, etc. It's awesome. It's awesome. Yeah. So Pete and I are playing through that, and then Pete and Lucas and I are all playing through the Trine series.
Off the top of my head, I'm not even familiar with this.
Oh my God. So Trine is basically a spiritual successor to the Lost Vikings. which I know you covered.
Oh, yes.
Where you pick between 3 characters and they all have different abilities to get through a stage. But it's a great 3-player game because 3 people get to swap between the 3 and you all have to work together.
Amazing.
There's Trine 1 through 4 on a single disc for Xbox. It's like maybe $8. And 5 just came out in November. So
Wow.
we're all going through Trine. I think we're on Trine 2 now. And then Lucas and I are playing through, get ready for this title. We're playing through .hack//GU last recode. I don't know if you've covered .hack yet. Have you?
I definitely haven't.
Okay, so .hack is this really deep, like, action RPG series that was on PS2. And the gimmick is that you're the player that is controlling an avatar that is inside an MMO that is being simulated within the game that you're playing, but it's not actually online and you're not actually playing with other people. Everyone is an NPC, but the way that the game does it is it makes you feel like you're actually playing online, a la Final Fantasy XI or Black Desert Online or that sort of thing. It is incredible, and the GU collection on PS4 is like... It's the 3 games that came out on PS2, and then because the collection came out in 2018, they added a 4th episode just to top it off, to be like, here's the whole game. And much like Mass Effect or Digital Devil Saga, when you do things in the first game, at the end of the game, it carries your save over into the next game. So all of the stuff you did, all of the missions that you did or didn't do affect the next game in the series. It's awesome. It's amazing.
That's fantastic. What a fun series that you just have going too between, your different sessions right now.
Okay, so those, and then on stream last night I just beat Blood Omen Legacy of Kain.
Hey.
And the community voted for the next game, which is Sunset Overdrive on Xbox One.
Okay.
Which I'd never played before, and it is amazing. I put an hour or 2 into it. And then on Fridays, I do an indie game stream, and right now I'm about to beat this game called Cyber Protocol.
Oh, fun.
So all the games, too many games.
Dude, just like truly a charcuterie of experiences that you have going right now. That's fantastic. Well, as I can already tell, we could spend just hours going through, I skipped so much of your history just to find out more. But Herb, thank you so much for sharing what you've already shared about your history. Yeah, of course.
Thank you for asking.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll get into all things Rocket Knight Adventures. So I'll see you on the other side. Welcome back to Call Me by Your Game. It's me, Connor, still here with Herb. Herb, welcome back.
Welcome back.
Here we are.
Hi.
Finally, we're going to get into the main event of the podcast today. Herb has brought on Rocket Knight Adventures. So, as I told you, Herb, I'm going to do a little table setting for this game. But again, green light to jump in, interject, or add any important context that we might need, that you're like, this is important enough to share. You're welcome to do that. But without further ado, I'll just jump right in. Rocket Knight Adventures is a platform game developed and published by Konami for the Sega Genesis. This game stars Sparkster, a possum knight who wields a rocket pack and sword, don't forget the sword, that can emit energy projectiles as he attempts to stop and truly forgive me before I say this, the Devantidos?
Yeah.
I probably put too much Spanish on that.
It's like the weirdest name. It's like, what were they smoking during this?
Yeah, who knows? The Devantidos Empire, that's probably what it is. An evil empire that attempts to break the seal of a powerful starship. Rocket Knight Adventures was designed by Nobuya Nakazato, the designer of the Contra games such as the Alien Wars, Hard Corps, and Shattered Soldier. Are you a fan of the Contra series as well?
I am. Something interesting to note about this game is that along with the director, most of the team are the same people who did Gradius or Gradius 3, Contra, 3 The Alien Wars, Super Castlevania 4,
Oh my
and then
gosh.
Castlevania Bloodlines as well. It's all like that Konami dream team of great composers, great designers, great artists, all of them. Basically, this was the time in gaming where every company was dead set to have a mascot platformer.
Yes.
And so Konami was like, look, this is what we need. Y'all better do it. And they got that team together, and this is their mascot platformer.
Oh, that's amazing. Already coming in hot with like the additional like context and details that we want. That's perfect. This game, as I think Herb actually mentioned earlier in the show, was released in Japan and North America in August 1993, and then it also came out in Europe in September and was received quite positively as soon as it came out. It would be followed by a direct sequel, Sparkster: Rocket Knight Adventures 2 on the Genesis the following year. A spin-off game just titled Sparkster was released in the same year for the SNES. Have you toyed around with that one as well? I know it's not the same game.
So it is the weirdest thing. This kind of all ties in, but so yeah, it goes Rocket Knight Adventures, then Sparkster Rocket Knight Adventures 2 on Genesis, then Sparkster on Super Nintendo. And even though they're both named Sparkster and they're both from Konami, they're made by slightly different teams, and they're both completely different games. Even though they have some of the same music and some of the same, like, obviously you're still Sparkster and you still, shoot your rocket around and have a sword. But they change some things, like instead of the bosses being pigs, they're wolves. They kind of flip-flop between those. It's like they can't decide what they want. And I think all of this kind of contributed to Sparkster not being a very popular game because it was very critically received very well. But the thing is, naming the first game Rocket Knight Adventures instead of the name of the character, and then naming the sequel and the third one the same name of the character but being different games, it's just, on top of being in the 90s where there was Bubsy, there was Arrow the Acrobat, there was Cool Spot, there was Sonic, there was Zero the Kamikaze Squirrel, there was Kirby, there was Yoshi. I mean, it was just like the mascot platforming was like overkill. And so I feel like a lot of people saw this and were just kind of like, oh, whatever, it's just another mascot platforming game. But I think the reason why I chose this and the reason why this game means so much to me is that it's like you have to understand that this was like the Konami dream dev team making some of the best games of that generation, deciding to do their own mascot platformer. And that, if you were to glance at the game, it wouldn't do it justice. You have to kind of like see the whole thing in action to understand why and how it's so good.
Yes, that makes a ton of sense. It's kind of, it's not the exact same scenario, but it's reminiscent of the Chrono Trigger Dream Team coming together. It's over at Square. So yeah, that was the spinoff, was Sparkster for the SNES. A revival of the series titled Rocket Knight was released in 2010, developed by the British studio Climax Group, what a name, and was released for the 360, PS3, and the Steam, and then announced in January, which I didn't realize this until preparing for this episode today, that a compilation of the first 3 games titled Rocket Knight Adventures Resparked has been announced by Limited Run Games for the PS4, PS5, and the Nintendo Switch. Although I don't have a date here of when that's coming out. Do you know that off the top of your head?
If it's limited run, it could be whenever. That's what I've learned. Limited run is doing good things, but their timetables are very just like, it's going to come out when it comes out, honey. Like, just wait,
Yeah. Well, that's great.
It comes with like a plushie doll. It comes with a vinyl of the soundtrack.
Oh.
If you get like the Ultimate Edition or whatever.
Yes.
It comes with like stickers and all this stuff. I do think it's really cool, and I love that Limited Run is pulling out, a lot of old school games. They pulled out Felix the Cat, which is another Konami game on NES. They pulled out all kinds of stuff. Mr. Gimmick, all these other games from the past that didn't like get their sort of glory. But I will say that probably I can speak for the community of people out there that do like Sparkster. We just want another game. Like we just want a new game. That's it.
Yes.
The one that's just called Rocket Knight, it was on Xbox Live and PS3. It is good, but it is definitely not made by Konami. And you can tell that it's kind of just like a passion project by the devs. It's very indie. I don't think it's bad, but it's probably like altogether, it's probably the worst Rocket Knight game. But I still don't think that means it's a bad game. I have played all of them. I have beaten all of them, but I have not nearly spent as much time as with any of them as I have with the first game.
Yes.
The first game is just it's some level of masterpiece that I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah. Well, I feel like that sets the table pretty well. Just in case, before we dive in, is there anything else you think is vital to include about Rocket Knight Adventures before we dive in?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, yeah. Awesome. I saw the consideration there. You're like, I could add so much more context. Well, Herb, let's dive in. How did you come to play this game in the first place? Obviously, you had your Genesis, but do you remember like specifically when this happened?
I had a Genesis, and it was 1993, and this game, or 94. I think I was So I was born in 85. So the interesting thing about being born in 85 is that every year was the grade I was in. So 94 was 4th grade, 98 was 8th grade, etc.
Interesting.
Right. So in 94, I was walking around my elementary school, the same one that had those old computers, and this kid, Jonathan Lopez, for whatever reason, like, we traded games. And the funny thing is, off the top of my head right now, and I try to think about this all day, I can't remember what game I traded him for, but he traded me Rocket Knight Adventures.
Okay.
And whatever I traded him for, it clearly was not that important because I got such a much better deal than he did.
Yeah.
But he traded it to me, and then it was one of those things where we were still in the same school for another year, but he like never asked for it back, and we kind of like never connected again, and it was like I saw him around school.
You're conveniently dodging Jonathan in the hallways.
Like, I promise I'll get it back to you. All right, it just like it never happened. It was the weirdest thing, and it wasn't like a conscious decision. It was just kind of like, I don't know. It was just one of those weird things when you're a kid where you like trade something or you give something away, and later you're like, why would I have done this? And I'm pretty sure he's saying that somewhere. So Jonathan, if you're out there.
He's listening to this episode right now, and he's just wringing his hands.
So I got it on a trade, which is quite possibly the most 90s video game kid thing you could possibly do.
Truly. And can I ask you again about this? I think you maybe have explained, so forgive me, but was it a thing where you two would just trade each other a game and there wasn't like, hey, do you have anything like this? I would assume. And it might be too far back to remember.
No, it was just this one time. It was kind of like,
okay.
We found out we both had Genesises. Genesises. And we didn't live near each other. I kind of lived like way out. Well, my dad used to say way out in the sticks. It wasn't way out in the sticks, but it was like very, very southern Miami, like way down by like the coast. Like when you look on a map of Florida, the very bottom dot before you get to the Keys, I was like way down there.
Okay.
And my school wasn't that close. It was like at least a 30-minute drive. And so, I don't know. It was kind of just like, it kind of just happened. I just remember us. Sure. I remember in my mind us handing each other different games. And then my mind is a blank after that because I love the game he gave me.
That's what we call fate right there.
For real. It really was like one of those moments where it's like, I didn't ask for this game. I didn't even know of its existence until he handed it to me. I mean, maybe I saw it at Blockbuster or something, but it didn't click until I had it. And it was like, oh, this game is like really good. Oh, okay. Wow. You know?
Yeah. Do you remember once you actually had it, like first impressions or diving into it?
First of all, the music is incredible. I'm actually going to stop mid-podcast and bring over this vinyl so I can show you this thing. Hold on.
Perfect. I'll see you soon. At first, I thought Herb was doing a bit of that they would come over to my house with the vinyl, but Herb has stepped off camera, is getting a vinyl, and is on their way back here. This is perfect. Amazing. I vamped in such a clever way. You'd be so proud, and that is incredible.
Yeah.
Oh my
It
gosh.
has let me check the vinyl here.
Ooh, for the listener at home, Herb's got the vinyl out. We're looking through it. Oh, that's just a gorgeous vinyl.
Nice and blue, and it has kind of like that rockety streak.
Ooh, that's really cool.
Yeah, wonderful game, wonderful soundtrack. That was the first thing that stood out to me. I'm very much a music head. I've been making beats forever and just like collecting music forever. And I think something that often happens when people talk about Sega Genesis is they talk about how awful the sound chip is. And I would really like to just for a second, I would like to say that just like any other instrument or tool, it depends on who's using it. You know, there's some Genesis games that sound like Shay Khan the Forever Man, which is a really excruciatingly painful soundtrack to listen to. And then there's people who make, like Yuzo Koshiro, who does Streets of Rage 2, which is probably maybe the most Boehner soundtrack of any game in the 90s. And just, it just really depends on like what the composer is doing with the instrument.
Who's the chef? Do they understand the flavor? It's that sort of thing.
Yeah. So the music stood out to me first. The fact that much like Sonic, you are a small furry creature that moves quickly. There is kind of, right off the bat, it's very Sonic-ish. And also, I would say the third thing is probably that it was just brutal. It's very difficult. If you've ever watched The Completionist, he has an episode about Rocky Knight Adventures, and he said many times that it is like in his top 3 or 5 hardest games to complete of all time.
Whoa.
Not to play it on easy or normal. That's still difficult, but doable. You get continues, you get lives. But the thing is, in America, they call it hard. In Japanese, they call it either very hard or crazy hard. On that difficulty, you get 1 life, 0 continues, and every hit is a death. So you can still get 1-ups throughout the game, but technically, let's say you were to get like the 9 1-ups or so that you can get throughout the game, when you get to the last boss, you essentially have 9 hits to do it because every hit is a death.
That is just a gauntlet. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So oh no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, when doing research for this episode and watching gameplay, watching videos of people's reviews on this game, I was watching it, and shmups are like this like sort of platforming shmup, very similar to the Contra series. I'm so bad at, but watching someone do this was like watching an acrobat just like dodge all sorts of projectiles. It was amazing.
Yeah, the speed run, I believe the world record for Rocket Knight Adventures is something like 28 minutes. I can do it in like 38, 40 minutes.
Not bad.
I'm not really a speedrunner, but if I was to speedrun any game ever, it's either that or it's Kid Chameleon because I just know them so well.
Kid Chameleon, nice.
That's the game that I also wanted to talk about, but different story. I loved your episode on it. It was so good.
Yes, you reached out about that one.
Oh, it was a brilliant episode, and I just, that game is deep in my heart.
I love it.
So yeah, Rocket Knight Adventures is very difficult. I have definitely like on easy or normal, I have done it like deathless, but I have definitely not done the crazy hard deathless because that's essentially hitless, which is just, it's very hard to do this game without getting hit at least once.
Yeah.
So I don't think I want to torture myself with that, but right before this, I streamed because I was like, oh, I'm going to be on this podcast today.
Yeah.
Let me just warm myself up with this game again. And I got once to the last boss and game over, and the second time to like, I don't know, level 6 and game over because it's been a while. I'm rusty,
Yeah.
I used to be able to do it like eyes closed, like not even, just muscle memory. And now it's tough. It's tough.
I bet. Well, having even gotten to play it today and probably other times in recent years, I would guess. What stands out to you about it now? What do you still love and enjoy about the game?
So the genre of the game, like on Wikipedia, they'll say platformer. I think in modern times we would call it action platformer. And I think in Japan, the term that they coined for this kind of game is situation rush, which is like,
interesting.
Right. It's like every part of the game just keeps upping the ante. You start out in a field, you're like, slicing pigs, and the pigs do this funny thing where you hit them once and then they fall out of their clothes like ghosts and goblins, and then they try to run away in their underwear so you can hit them again. So each enemy gets like 2 hits, so you start out in a field, but then it's like, then you're in a cavern with reflective surfaces that you have to use to see where you're jumping so you don't jump into the lava, and then you're in behind a waterfall, that you switch in between the layers of the waterfall so you can defeat a boss. And then you're, flying through space, and then you're on a vehicle, and then you're doing this. Like every new situation just like pushes you through the game. You're not spending too much time in any one area. There's like every level has like a mini boss and like another mini boss and like a big boss. It's just rapid fire, like throwing stuff at you, different situations, different challenges, and all of it builds off of this foundation of a character that can only do basically 3 things, which is you can attack, you can jump, and you can rocket, and that's it. But like so many classic games where they take a simple thing and build on it into like a really satisfying complexity, I don't know, it's just every part of Rocket Knight Adventures is memorable. Every song is good. Every level is like, oh yeah, this is the level where you do that thing. Oh yeah, this is the boss where that crazy shit happens. Like it's very like, it
sounds like rich.
Yes, it's rich, and it's just very like, every time you turn around, every time you go to a new place, you're doing something that you couldn't have possibly anticipated this character was going to be doing. And I don't know. I mean, like, so the 2 Sparkster games, the SNES game and the Genesis games, as well as the later like Xbox 360 PS3 game, those 3 let you rocket multiple times in midair before you have to land again.
Oh.
But the first game, once you rocket, Sparkster goes into this like, oh shit animation, and you have to land before you can do anything else again.
Yeah.
So even though that might sound limited, it's like, for some reason, it's a combination of the level design, the bosses, and sort of like the visceral, like everything explodes in a fantastic display of explosions, just like Contra 3. Every enemy or boss kind of looks like a little insane, and they have like weird hair or weird facial expressions. You're on a train at one point. You're swimming in a factory full of spikes at one point. Like, it's just like everything is so turned up to 11. Everything is like that 90s tude of like totally awesome, totally, rad-tacular. Everything is like turned all the way up. And I think Sonic really kind of pushed the rest of the video game industry to start getting a little wild. And Rocket Knight Adventures definitely takes the baton and says, well, what if we just strapped a rocket on him? And also, if you remember at the time, there was a really popular movie by Disney called The Rocketeer, and Sparkster is essentially like, what if a mascot platformer and The Rocketeer had a game,
Yes. The Rocketeer got turned by a witch into gosh, I already forgot
Oppossum.
What's happened. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was, gosh, which that surprised me. I was like, I don't think I know what an animated possum looks like, but I guess this is one.
There's only a couple situations where you actually like hang from your tail in the game.
Yes.
But they have cute little details, like, when you're on land, you hang from your tail, but when you're underwater, since if you press nothing, Sparkster always floats. So you can hang from bars in the water, and he hangs upright to where it's like pulling him, and he's like this,
yes, because he'd be rising.
Right.
In the water. That's a cute detail.
There's lots of little details, and just like Sonic, if you wait too long, he'll kind of get impatient and be like, "Let's go," It's very close to Sonic, but because you have a weapon, and because you have this, like, how do I put it? I was talking about it on stream earlier. There is something to be said in two-dimensional gaming for any opportunity that you get to fly. Okay,
Hmm.
it's why the raccoon tail in Mario 3 was so big. It's why Kirby was such a big deal. It's why the cape in Mario World was such a big deal. It's why flying with tails on the airplane in Sonic 2 was such a big deal.
Yeah.
There's just something about the freedom of being able to fly. And in Rocket Knight Adventures, you can't fly, so to speak. There are shoot 'em up stages where you fly automatically, but like the fact that you can control your velocity and trajectory in any direction, it
Hmm.
just makes this, like, it may seem tame now, but in 1993, a combination of like the parallax scrolling, the transparency and the reflections, the speed at which you can move, the tightness of the controls, the fact that you can fly, all of that felt like you were breaking the game. It felt like the
Sure.
game gave you a level of player expression that was like beyond the intended purpose. And
That can be such an intoxicating thing
yes,
in a game. There's a few that I feel like I've really synced up with in my life that, yeah, once you're doing that, you're like, oh, you put it in a great way, which is player expression. And I'm not that you feel like you're invincible, but that you can navigate and control this character in such creative ways, or ways that you maybe wouldn't have thought when you first started to use them and learn their abilities, is so fun.
yeah, and I feel like, don't get me wrong, some of the best games out there that exist are very rigid, rather formulaic experiences, especially old arcade games. There wasn't a lot of room for player expression. There wasn't a lot of room for variation. Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Space Invaders, like, you play them as they're played, and that's kind of it. But around the 16-bit era, and some NES games too, but especially around the 16-bit era, there started to just be all these games where it felt like you were like gaming the system. It felt like you were somehow tapping into this thing that maybe the
Yeah.
devs know about, but you could use it in ways that weren't necessarily what they wanted you to do. And Rocket Knight
Very
Adventures,
Neo in the Matrix,
Yeah.
sort of. It's kind of an
yeah,
overused. I've used that too much when it comes to video games and just the control of a character, but it's kind of like you're bending the rules almost.
yes, right. Like yes, I could face this boss head on, or I could rocket behind him, or I could rocket into him. And the thing is, like, if you rocket straight at someone, it does one hit that's worth like 3 damage. 3 swords basically. But if you rocket up at them at an angle, he does this thing where he hits them and then spins into them and does like multiple hits. So there's bosses that
That's cool.
you can like kill before they even get on the screen, if you know what to do and where to do it.
Wow.
And having that level of like, like, it's just like in Sonic, where in the old Sonic games, you could jump on Robotnik and do as many hits as it would not limit how many hits you could do, as long as you could get it done before he leaves the screen.
Mhm.
And so you could just take care of him real quick if you knew what to do. And having that sort of like power, having that ability, like, especially as a kid in like 4th grade, it just felt like, I had already played a bunch of games up to that point, and all of those games have essentially a single solution, or maybe 2 or 3 things you could do. And I'm not going to say Rocket Knight Adventures it's not a massive open world game. It's not roguelike. There are only a couple RNG elements. It's not like the most player expression ever, but at the time, controlling a like powerful rocket on a platforming game character just felt so free. It felt liberating,
Yes. I love hearing that. Do you have a moment that sticks out to you the most from this game, whether it be a boss fight or a traversal section?
So
That might be asking you to, pick your favorite kid, but
the last boss is really tough. I don't know. I think well, it's kind of spoilers, but it's also like a 31-year-old game, so I don't really care that hard. At the very last boss, there is a part where, first of all, he takes a metric fuck ton of hits. And then once you kill him, you think it's over. And a lot of games have done this, don't get me wrong. But at the time, again, I was young. It was still a new thing. And it wasn't like every game was doing this. It was still kind of like you don't know if the end of the game is going to be the end of the game. And like many Konami classics, they always kind of like they mess with you a little bit. They're like,
Mm-hmm.
well, this is the end, maybe. We'll see. We'll see. You know, one of the things they do is if you play it on easy, you cannot face the actual last battle. You can beat the guy, but there's another thing that happens after that you won't see unless you play it on normal or above.
Very Star Fox 64 in that way.
So after you beat the last guy, there's this part where like the pig star, aka the Death Star, is exploding and you're falling down in the atmosphere back to Earth, and the boss comes out again, and you have to like avoid his hits, but you can't do any damage because you're in like an escape pod. So you just have to like get the fuck out of the way a few times, but he can still kill you there, and if that's like your last life, that could be game over, even though you already beat him.
No.
So that's
stressful.
definitely happened to me before, yeah.
Yes.
So that sticks out because I just remember being a kid and being like, oh, it's not over? Like,
Yes.
oh shit, I can still die here? What? Like, how dare they, you know? So
I'm sure learned the hard way too.
Yeah.
That's great. I want to finally go back and like dive into the moment when you had this a little more. We started to get some great context of, you know, you getting this game in a trade with Jonathan Lopez, I believe it was. Just the celebrity of this episode.
My own personal J-Lo.
Yeah. Oh, we all gotta have one, and he's yours. Can you? I want to do a little scene painting as I do often on the podcast. Can you take me back to where your setup was for your Genesis and just sort of paint the room for me a bit?
Okay, so like I was saying earlier, when we first got a Genesis, all I had was Sonic 1, and I had a little bitty TV in my room. And that lasted from anywhere from 6 months to a year. I can't remember, but I do remember my parents taking that out of my room. And then from then on, all I used to play Sega on was the TV in the living room.
Okay.
I would get a big pillow, and I would kind of sit on the floor, you know, because fuck chairs. And like, you know, I think anybody who grew up with gaming, especially at that time, there was just something about sitting on the floor in front of the TV. It was just a thing. I don't know.
It's so relatable.
Yeah. So I would have the Genesis. I was really meticulous about this. I would have the Genesis in like the entertainment cupboard thing. It would be covered with a towel so it wouldn't get dusty. And I had it on this like essentially what is like a cutting board. So that it wouldn't overheat, because I like in my head as a kid I was like, this is a luxury item. I don't know how much this costs or how any of it works inside. I'm not gonna fuck it up. I'm not gonna let it overheat. I'm not gonna step on it. I'm not gonna pull any cords. I want it to last, and I still have the same Genesis now.
You're already just building habits for that I bet you still employ today with your games and your consoles. Yes,
I would.
It's so funny.
I'd probably say I'm more lax now just because I have like too many, but
sure.
But it definitely it made me, I don't know, it gave me like a very strong appreciation for the things I've spent money on.
For sure.
Because that was a gift. That was a gift from my parents, but over the years it's like, you know, especially like we could get into a whole thing about it, we won't, but there's so many things that come out these days, whether it's an appliance or a car or a console, that just like they just don't last like they used to. Like they're just not made the same way. And there's many reasons for that, you know, and probably the best example is, the best example of something that does last and does work really well is the Switch. Like the Switch is solid. Other than that whole Joy-Con thing that they voluntarily fix for you if you send them to, you know, other than that, the Switch is like solid. It feels like how old consoles used to feel.
Totally.
So we had maybe a 23-inch or 25-inch TV in the living room. It was a Magnavox. It was big and chunky. It had big chunky buttons. It was in a wooden entertainment center that was like, you know, cherry wood or something. I don't know. My parents,
nice.
I don't know. You know how boomers are. They love their furniture.
They do.
They love it. They swear by this furniture. And to be fair, my mom still has it in her house and it still looks great. So
okay.
But yeah, I would my mom. So I kind of can't not talk about this.
Sure.
I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 5, and I was on like Ritalin and that whole shebang, therapy, neurologist, all that stuff. And one of the ways that the therapist would suggest to kind of handle, shall we say, leisure time or playtime with me was to have it become like a thing that I earned based on chores and things I did.
Ah,
So like every time, I would have a list, a little checklist, and I would do all these chores, and each one would be like 5 or 10 minutes. And that way I wouldn't spend 8 hours playing it, but also it would kind of, my parents' perspective was like, if we let him do it like this, it'll teach him to sort of manage his desires by putting
yes.
work before play. I look back on it and I am appreciative of that in some ways. And in other ways, I'm like, God, I was so groomed for capitalism. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely.
But at the same time, it did forge a connection in my mind of like, if I do the things I'm supposed to do, then I can do the things I want to do. So I would only get like 30 minutes to an hour of play, maybe once or twice a week. It wasn't every day. It wasn't like I could just go turn it on whenever I wanted. It was kind of like I did stuff, and then on a night that wasn't a school night, I could spend this amount of time and play this game. And so, yeah, that was kind of like the whole setup.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh, I had a sort of a similar situation at my home, more so just with the sort of earning time to play / cashing in that time was precious, and I really felt like I wanted to make the most of it, since I also, those sort of restrictions, as I might call them, they went away after a while. But I remember really being like, this is my 30 minutes to play the game. My mom still jokes with me. She'll imitate me and say, "Mom, I'm not at a save point. Like, I can't save it yet." Because, like, you might not be at certain games.
Yeah.
But so anyway, all that being said, it's a way for me to interject and just say I can relate to the sort of earning it and cashing it in aspect.
Yeah, it felt like every moment was precious.
Yes.
30 minutes of Sonic, I mean, I really learned how to essentially speedrun by necessity.
Mm-hmm.
By necessity of like, I only have 30 minutes to play this. I better not screw up a bunch of times so that I can get as far as I can get, because I've never beaten this before, like that kind of thing.
Yes. I don't want to play Green Hill Zone like for all of my 30 minutes.
Right, exactly. Which is funny because like, essentially, especially in Sonic 1, that's what you're kind of supposed to do, is to get all the 1-ups in the first stage so that the rest of the game is easier.
Good point.
But it's hard to time management has always been hard for me. It's a very, common thing for folks with ADHD, for folks on the spectrum. Time management is tough. And sometimes I remember feeling jealous of other kids that could just go home and play whatever they wanted as long as they wanted. But I look at it now and I think that my folks tried to do like the best that they knew how. And dealing with a kid with ADHD, especially in a time where that was heavily stigmatized more than it is now. Now it's much more common. But at the time, I remember specifically being the only kid in my class that would have to go see the nurse between classes. So I would always show up late to class, and everybody would turn and be like, "Oh, there's the Ritalin kid. There's the kid who has to take drugs." So like that whole theme, that whole experience really played into my appreciation of video games and the time that I got allotted to, or that I earned to enjoy them, for sure.
Yes, that's great. You've already, just stemming from the scene painting, you've just filled us in on some great context, or some very important context for this time in your life. Are there any other details about it, whether it's other things you would do or events that you wanted to share that sort of surround that moment for you today?
I guess I just want to put this out here. I feel like it's definitely probably been talked about on the podcast already, but we still have people to this day. If you noticed, I didn't watch the Oscars because I'm not that person, but I've seen a bunch of clips, and literally at the Oscars in 2024, a dude got up on there. I can't remember who it was, some composer. He won an award. I don't know if you saw this. I saw the clip.
I don't even know where we're getting to, so I'm interested.
He basically was like, "I'm so glad my parents bought me musical instruments instead of video games when I was a kid." And it was like, Whoa, completely out of left field shade towards
Yeah,
gamers
why did games need to catch strays right
in the
there?
middle of an Oscar speech. I'm like,
Yeah.
dude, those of us who had like, first of all, my parents bought musical instruments and gaming consoles. So
Yeah.
like there's that, but also this I, in Japan, games for decades before America are seen as part of the culture, as normal
Mhm.
as comic books or karaoke or movies or music. In America, for a long time, games were seen as toys, which is why they were only sold at toy stores, KB Toys, Toys R Us, that kind of thing. And it
Yeah.
wasn't really in America until PS2, because PS2 was a DVD player, that it started getting sold at Circuit City, at Best Buy, at places, at CompUSA they had PS2s, at stores that sold, at FYE that only sold
Hmm.
DVDs, that didn't even sell video games, they had PS2s because it was a DVD player.
Hmm.
So up until PS2 and even now, 2024 Oscars, somebody is essentially minimizing and dismissing video games as something that is for children or toys. And I'm like, y'all, like we can't we're you're at what, 200 episodes of this? Like, video games mean
Yeah.
so much more to us humans than
Yeah.
we can possibly say.
And as you know, many of us know, are so tied to creativity and
Oh
inspiration.
yeah.
And I bet there are, there are definitely composers out there who probably started from a love of games and wanted to make music, or were already musically inclined kid who then played games and was like, oh, what if I made music for this?
Right.
So yeah, it's too bad that reductive take was
I
shared.
mean, even if we're just talking about, Koji Kondo, who's made like all of Mario and most of Zelda.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone on Earth, more or less, if you've had any exposure to video games at any point in your life, knows the Mario song and the Zelda theme. And just that alone, just that fact that anyone can immediately name Mario or Zelda,
Yes.
right there, like it's like there's no need to ever reduce video
Yeah,
games,
definitely.
like I just wanted to put
Yeah.
that out there.
No, yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. That's, we don't talk about it enough on the show, but it's an important reminder to know that sort of perspective still exists and
It's
probably will
wild.
forever. But anyway, um, before we wrap up, your sort of thoughts on Rocket Knight and put a little bow on it, is there any details that you haven't gotten to share yet that you'd really like to, whether it's game specific or context specific?
I love Rocket Knight Adventures. I think that there is like a flow state that this game has, similar to Contra or Castlevania, that is so powerful. Once you've mastered the timing of when exactly to let go of the button to make Sparkster go, it's like you just get into this groove. You get into this groove of like taking every enemy out right before it comes on the screen, or right when it comes on the screen, knowing where everything is, knowing where the drops are going to be, knowing what the boss weak points are going to be. And you could say that for a lot of games, but the truth of the matter is that, I mean, much of 90s gaming, even among, pillars of gaming royalty, there were so many shoddy games back in the day. There are now too. We have good games and bad games always, but back then there was a concerted effort to get games not only to be very difficult because of the rental market situation, to get people to buy the whole game so that they couldn't beat it within the time of a rental, for those of you at home. And I feel like there were so many games that looked cool, but when you play them, especially a lot of these other mascot platformers, whether it's even later ones like Croc or Bubsy or any of that stuff, when you play those and then you play Rocket Knight Adventures, there is a massive gap in the tightness of the control and how everything comes together, how the cues of the music, how there's no pause between scenes, how there's no seams in the game. You don't see any seams. You don't see really any glitches. You don't frequently get hit or lose because of anything that wasn't your fault. It's like a brilliantly tightly designed game. And I think beyond the character and the music and the aesthetic, I feel like it has gotten glanced over so many times because it looks like any one of those games. But I personally would put it up there with the Sonics, with the Marios, with the Spyros, with the Crashes, in terms of like how well made it is. It's just like a very well made game. If you thought Castlevania 4 or Contra 3 were like brilliantly executed games, Rocket Knight is on the exact same level, just in a different genre. I think the music I still find myself like humming the music, or it gets in my head now, which out of hundreds upon thousands of video game experiences that I've had, like that really says a lot. For a game that can be beaten in under 30 minutes, I mean, it just really sticks out to me. I would not recommend anyone play this game on hard for the first time ever. Maybe it will break you. It is like Holy Diver or Silver Surfer on NES hard. It is hard. But like if you put it on easy and you just play through and keep pushing yourself, I don't know. It's one of those games that by the end, you truly feel that sense of accomplishment. There's no hand holding, there's no passwords, there's no saves. It's like you do it, you may get 1 or 2 continues. If you can't do it in that time, you're out of luck. So it forces you to harness the best possible gamer in yourself that you can be to like conquer this thing,
Yes.
So yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, thanks, Herb. Thanks for bringing on Rocket Knight Adventures and sharing about, not just the game itself, but what it means to you and the place that it holds in your life. So thanks for doing that.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And I know I told you off podcast, but I'm going to embellish on you for a minute. Y'all, please listen to more of this podcast. Connor's doing an excellent job. He's a wonderful host. He's a very kind-hearted person. It shows through you all the time and all the things you talk about and the way you treat people.
Thank you.
And I really think you're doing an important thing here by not just discussing video games, but discussing the ways that we connect to them and to each other through them. That is such a powerful thing. I can't even tell you.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that. And I got my clip now. I'm going to use that. That's just going to be the ad for the show from here on out. But Herb, thank you again. But before we go, I got a couple of post-show segments prepared for you based on you bringing on Rocket Knight Adventures today. Of course, the first of 2 is the Fact Me by Your Game segment. And I'm just going to share some fun facts with you about this game you brought on today.
Cool.
First and foremost, this one comes directly from Wikipedia. There was no specific citation in it, so I'm just going to take the article at its word. But I have this titled Sparkster Cameos Galore. Now, this is probably relevant to you because as a fan of this character, you're probably keeping an eye out for wherever you could see Sparkster in other games or media. So without further ado, I'm going to rattle off a bunch of cameos Sparkster's made. Sparkster has appeared as a playable character in games such as New International Track and Field for the Nintendo DS and Crazy Kart Racing for iPhone and iPod Touch. That tells you when that game must have come out, since there was the iPod Touch back then. He also has cameos in Ganbare Goemon 2 and for the SNES, Snatcher for the Mega CD. Did you know about this? That's news to me.
Yeah, the Hideo Kojima game, his classic sort of opus before Metal Gear Solid was a thing. Sparkster, in one of the scenes, you're in a bar, and Sparkster can be seen sitting in the audience of the bar.
Amazing.
Yeah.
There's a little Konami connection.
Yep.
I love that. Also in Jikyo Power Pro Wrestling 96, Max Voltage also came out for the SNES. For Mitsumete Night for the PlayStation, he was disguised by Pastel in Twin Bee Paradise for PC, and a figure resembling him also appears in an alternate ending to Contra Shattered Soldier for the PS2, and as a nonogram pixel on Pixel Puzzle Collection for iPhone and Android. Just a slew of cameos and appearances, and I'm sure the hardcore fans like yourself, whenever you can find him, you're like, there he is.
I have to show this off because we're here, and I know this is gonna be on video, but I actually have a Sparkster tattoo.
Oh, please.
You got to see it. Check it out.
Oh my gosh, look at him. Incredible.
It's just like the outline, I had been, but
yeah.
My friend who did it wanted to color it in, and I was like, no, I actually like it like this because it looks like an abstract object. If you don't already know what it is, but it's like, it's like him like flying from the side, like in the shoot 'em up stages. It's that profile.
Yes. Oh, that's so good. Now you're a true fan. That's the only fact I have to share, and it's barely a fact. It's kind of just a slew of appearances. The next segment we'll get into, the final one for the show, is the game recommendation segment. Now, as you know, Herb, this is my one forced tie-in to the movie Call Me By Your Name, where I am going to treat Rocket Knight Adventures as your passionate summer love in Italy that, unfortunately, is not going to work out. So in order to help you get over this heartbreak, I've got 3 flings here that all have something in common with Rocket Knight Adventure. So are you ready to potentially be set up?
I am. Tell me.
Okay, here we go. So I've got 3 of these for you today. The first of which is if you're ready to move into 3D gaming, the world of 3D gaming on the next generation of systems, but you want to have some sort of rocket element, I'll recommend to you Rocket Robot on Wheels, a game that, I'll be honest, once we had set up this recording a while back, I read it so fast that I thought that was the game you were going to talk about.
I could do that one. I love that game. That's a great game.
This is one that I know of because it's what's the developer
Sucker
who also
Punch.
worked on Sucker Punch?
Yeah.
Yes, known best now probably for Ghost of Tsushima, but also the Sly Cooper series, correct?
And Infamous too, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So, a totally charming, a game I've never played, but I would love to play.
It's so good.
The N64.
One of the first games, like, can I just...
Please.
Rocket Robot on Wheels is another, much like Sparkster, in the same way that it's easy to overlook because there were a lot of 3D platformers with mascots on N64. But the cool thing about Rocket Robot on Wheels is that it's one of the first games, if not the only game on N64, that has true physics. So like when you set a ball down on a hill, it rolls and gathers speed as if it would in real life. And that was not a thing that happened on N64. That was not a common gaming implementation of physics that didn't happen back then. So Sucker Punch, it was their first game. It's not very popular, but it's very charming and it's all about physics gameplay. And I think it's great. It's one of the few games on N64 that I've 100%ed.
I love that. You know, these recommendations that I do, as I told you before the show, they're mostly jokes or just fun tie-ins, and I don't expect the guests to ever play them or even like them. So I'm always glad when someone's like, this game rules. So that's huge. Your second recommendation is that if, Herb, at this point, you don't fear bullet hell. You're like, bring it on, welcome. And you want a more classic animation style, I'll recommend an incredibly popular game, Cuphead. Now, how do you like Cuphead?
Cuphead is brilliant, and the fact that it took like 10 plus years to develop, I mean, they really went above and beyond with the animation, the difficulty, the co-op. That is a game that I have not beaten yet, but I've played a bunch of times with others and by myself.
Nice.
It is definitely hard, but it's funny if we're talking about difficulty because it's like Rocket Knight on very hard is 1 life, 0 continues, and every hit is a death. Cuphead is you will die endlessly until you figure out these patterns. But because it's not an old school game, you still get to just start the level over. You don't have to like game over to the beginning of the title screen. So like it's weird. Cuphead is in like this weird limbo of like it is so hard. It is so difficult. Like I'm never gonna call that game easy. But you still don't have to game over to the beginning like an NES or a Genesis game. So I'll give it that, you know, like
totally not the same restrictions of like an older title with a similar difficulty. It's a game that is not in my wheelhouse, but I also played a ton of and I got very deep into this game a few years ago when I bought it, and I still haven't picked it back up. But amazing game as we've been talking about. And finally, your final recommendation is if you know what, you've had a change of heart and speed is not your thing anymore. You want to move slow. That's really all you care about. I'm going to recommend to you a game that doesn't even have a Wikipedia article. It's called Super Snail Jump and Run. I'm going to send you, and also there's like almost no information about this game out there, but I'm going to send you a YouTube video that I found. I would assume you haven't heard of this thing.
I have not. Tell me.
Okay, so I'm going to plop this. You don't have to watch this now. Maybe it'd be something to watch later, but I'm going to pop this in our chat here on Zoom. But it is some weird stuff, and I basically just wanted to make a joke about moving slow. That's really it.
that works. I get it. That flies.
I think it's from like 2007 or so. It's a game where you're controlling a snail and sort of shooting at other interactables and enemies in this world. But anyway, that'll wrap up the Rex. I'll just wrap them up by recounting them. We have Rocket, Robot on Wheels, Cuphead, and Super Snail Jump and Run. That'll do it for the segment, and that'll finally bring us to the end of the show. So on our way out, Herb, before we do plugs, again, I know we've been thanking each other and been so kind at this episode, but thanks again for joining me. This was so much fun to hear from you and get to know you a little bit today.
Thank you so much. It's nice to get to know you too. I really think you're doing something special with this. Please turn it into a book, or at the very least, a zine.
Yeah. Gosh. Finally Connor gets into zines.
I think this like, I truly mean it when I say I think your comprehension of games and your willingness to meet people where they're at with games and discuss it is truly special, and truly like not as common as I would like it to be in the gaming sort of universe. So thank you for doing this podcast. Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening to me beg you on Instagram.
Hey, you betcha. And truly, again, that's so kind of you. Thank you so much. I'm really glad you feel that way. But on our way out, I know we plugged a bunch of stuff up top and you just threw your link tree in chat, but what do you want to plug today?
So I stream every Tuesday and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern on twitch.tv/GaymerHerb. I rant a whole bunch on Instagram and Twitter. It's not always what people want to hear, but I try to be a nice, honest, and open human being. I also want to say trans rights are human rights. I also want to say Black lives still matter, even if it's not February. And I guess the last thing is that I just want to encourage everybody to keep playing games, whether it's new or old, whether it's on a platform you know or don't. Whether it is hot or trending or not, just play different games. Just try different games. You never know what you're going to find, and you never know what it will bring out of you as a person.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for all of that. I'm going to put, of course, your link tree in the show notes, and then probably a specific link to your Twitch, just so we can get there even faster. I'm sure it's on your link tree as well. But I'm going to go ahead and just close this out with some plugs of my own. The cover art for Call Me By Your Game is done by Glenn J. You can find him and his other great work on Instagram at Glenn with 2 N's.jay. The show is produced, edited, and the original music up top is done by Jeremy Schmidt. You can give him a tip of your cap and check out his podcast, Video Games, a comedy show, wherever you get yours. You can follow me all over social media. So I've got links to all my stuff there, including my Twitch channel, which I'm at twitch.tv/consiscool69, where lately, Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, me and Jeremy have been going through the Halo series in a co-op fashion. And we tried to finish Halo 2 last night, but for the first time, we had like an internet connection issue and it booted us, I think, twice once we were like halfway through a mission, so we stopped doing it. But anyway, most Tuesday nights at 7 Pacific, I'll be streaming Halo campaigns and co-op. I've also been, whenever at my convenience, streaming through Half-Life 2 for the first time, which is a blast. I see you're probably a fan of that.
Great
Herb.
Game, yeah.
Oh, I think I'm going to stream it tomorrow again. But it's my first time going through it, and I am just like eating this game up. I liked the first one, which I played last year for the first time.
Nice.
This game is like, I have no complaints about this one, and I had several about the original.
Yeah, it definitely, I think, 2 aged a lot better than the first one, and also
Definitely.
just pushed first-person shooters way forward. Like it made every other first-person shooter seem, I'm not gonna say basic, but it seemed like they were all about shooting, whereas Half-Life is like, it's about interacting, it's about exploring.
Yes.
You know?
I'm such a sucker, not for first-person shooter, but for like, even though I said that's all I'm streaming right now, but for first-person like adventure sort of shooter.
Yeah.
So it's been such a joy to play that. Again, if you follow me on social media, you'll see when I go live as well, dear listener. And then lastly is that I would encourage you to check out our Patreon. We're over at patreon.com/supernpcradio. If you like me and the conversations that I have with people about video games, there's a ton of bonus content for you over there that you can find. We've got stuff at every tier. So find one that's right for you if you're interested in not only supporting us, but getting bonus content from us every week. Currently, we are about to wrap up. In fact, when this episode comes out, we will have already finished our Mass Effect Games Club, where we're going through that in a book club style that releases every Friday at the $5 tier and up. And then starting, if not the week after, then 2 weeks after that, we'll be going through the original BioShock in that same format. So again, it's super fun. And also, if you're someone out there and you're like, hey, I want to hear this stuff, but like I can't really send you guys money for this and support you that way, we have a free Games Club feed of our legacy stuff. So if you want to check out our old stuff that everything is eventually going to go to anyway, that's just the Super NPC Games Club, wherever you get your podcasts. A lot of plugs for me. But that'll do it for this episode of Call Me By Your Game. We will see you on the next one.